Data types in Python. Hello, I am Parth Arya and today I will explain you the concept of data types, specifically in Python. You would have noticed that almost everything around us is distinguished into types. It is categorized into types. Well, that just makes it easier to identify things, to refer to things, to group them together when we want to use them. Similarly, in Python, we also have data types. Our data is divided into types. So if we have something written as an integer, we have a separate type for that. If we have a word that we use in English language, like hello, we have a separate type for that. And just like we would have one with, say, vegetables, we have different types of vegetables, and we have fruits, we have milk products, we have so many things. And just like that, in Python, we have types. Now, our first type, our basic type, is called an integer. Just like in math, an integer in Python can be used for calculations, it can be used to compare, and so on. So 7568 is an integer, and 1009 is an integer, 0 is an integer, minus 54 is an integer, and so on. But 9.5 is not an integer. That is what we called a float, a floating value. So whenever we have a decimal, our data type is called a float. 9.5 is a float, minus 7.6 is a float, and 0 is also a float, and all integers can be of course converted into floats, because 8 is the same as 8.0 mathematically. So similarly in Python, we can also compare them. Now what if we want to have data that is words of the English language, just simple characters or alphabets or digits? Well, that is what we call a string. So I write a double quotation or a single quotation, and I write whatever I want, hello, and this is called a string. It is enclosed in quotation marks. So I could have anything here. I could have just some random characters, or I could also have numbers here. But notice that since they are enclosed in double quotation marks, they are called strings and not actual integers. So I couldn't use this piece of data with numeric calculations because it is a string. You could also convert data into different types. So if I write str, which is a function which is used to convert something to a string, and I write 7. So what I'm doing here is converting this integer 7 into a string. When I press enter, you can see that 7 is converted into a string. It is enclosed in quotation marks. Now I could do that with 7.5 as well, and it is a string. And if I want to convert something to an integer, I go int, and I could write 6 here. Notice that this is a string because it is enclosed in double quotation marks, and I am converting this string into an integer. You can see there are no quotation marks here, so this is an integer. And similarly, I could also convert 7.0 into an integer. Now what if I convert 7.5 into an integer? Well, it rounds it down to the nearest integer. And what if I convert a string that does not actually contain a number? What do you think will happen? So the is of course not a number, and I want to convert this into an integer. Let's see. Oh, this is an error, because I can't convert the into an integer. It's not an integer value. So that is why we get a value error, which means that the value we have written here is wrong. This is not what Python expected, and this is called an error. While coding, you would encounter many errors, but don't be scared of them. Just notice what they say here and you'll be able to figure it out. Now, moving on to converting into a float. So this is the float function, and I could have 5 here, and this would be converted to a float, 5.0. Similarly, in a string, 7.8 converted into a float. So notice that str, int, and float. They are just like we would use in English language, and that is how Python is made, so that it can be easy to understand and learn. Now these were our three main basic types. Now what we have is called a Boolean, which is spelled like this. A Boolean is a value that can have only two values, so true and false. And notice that the first character here is capital, unlike other key terms in Python like float or int or whatever. Now true and false are just what they mean, true and false. So I could check whether something is true by having a value to that. So if I wanted to check if 7 is greater than 5, that would return true because it is a true statement. And similarly, if I want to equate something, if x is equal to 5 and I have put the value of x as 5, that would return true. And if it is not, it would return false with the first letter capital. And we will get into that later too, because it is difficult to explain that without an example, and we will learn that more in operators. Now these were our basic data types. Now let's move on to some complex ones. First of all, there is list. This is actually also a basic data type, but it is more complicated to understand. So a list is written with square brackets. So this is an empty list. The purpose of a list is to have various data in a single location, so grouped together, just like you have a shopping list or another list that you would make. Similarly, in Python, things are grouped together using a list. So I could have as many elements as I want here. Each item is called an element. So 5. This is a list with a single element, 5. Now to add more elements, I separate them with a comma and write 7. And then I could write 9. But I could also write a string here. I could also write hello. So you can merge different data types together too. I could also write true here. They all work. Now this is a list. When I press enter, the same thing is returned to me because I'm not actually doing anything. I'm just writing it in the IDLE shell run mode. So you can see that this is now a list. Now next we have tuples. Tuples are very similar to lists. So I could have the same thing here. The only difference is that they are enclosed in parentheses, right? And you can see that this is a tuple. Tuples are similar to lists, but they have certain differences. I will explain that when we get deeper into tuples, because the difference is a little difficult to explain right now. Next is what is called a dictionary. So just like you would have an English dictionary with words along with meanings, a dictionary in Python has keys and values. So a dictionary is enclosed in curly brackets. So this is an empty dictionary, and I could write anything I want here. So hello, and I have to write a colon after this, and I could write whatever I want here. So this is called the key, and this is called the value. So whatever is before the colon is the key, and after the colon is the value, and together they are called a key value pair. And of course I could have more keys and values in a dictionary by separating them with a comma. So whatever, and I could also write an integer here, and you can see that our dictionary is created. So we also have what is called a none value. It is not actually a data type, but it is when you have nothing. So none is a keyword for nothing. So if something is empty, if I refer to a file which is actually empty, it has nothing inside, so it would return none. And you can see that nothing is printed because none is nothing. And that is a perfect way to wrap this episode, and hope you enjoyed, hope you understood about data types. You can check out my book on Python in the description below, and I hope you enjoyed. Thank you so much.